Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can I give you all and the candidates a very warm welcome to St Owen's Parish Hall this evening for the 9th Hustings meeting for the forthcoming senatorial election. Can I respectfully ask at the moment if any of you have any phones or electronic devices that you perhaps switch them off or to silent? Thank you. Yes to that question. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes to make their introduction or speech. A warning bell will be sounded 20 seconds before the end of the 3 minutes, and when the time has elapsed, the bell will be rung twice. I will then take questions from the floor, and can I respectfully request that they are precise and are general questions, not aimed at one particular candidate. Each candidate will then have 2 minutes to reply with a warning bell 20 seconds before the end and 2 bells when the time is up. It is my intention to close the hustings at 9:30, and that will then allow parishioners to informally approach the candidates afterwards if they wish to do so. Prior to the commencement of the hustings, a draw took place to establish the order in which the candidates will speak. And can I ask the first candidate, Mr. John Young, to please start. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In my 3 years as the Environment Scrutiny Panel Chairman and Backbench Deputy, I brought 21 private members' propositions and 119 questions. And I achieved a new planning appeals system, new island plan policies to protect St Bullard's Bay and neighbours from damaging development, and plans for over 55 housing in every parish. Stamp duty reductions for first-time buyers, tax relief for charitable donations, protection for survivors' pensions, and many other things. So I think this experience and 13 years as a State's Chief Officer, plus 7 years in top-level legal and finance industry positions, enable me to say I feel I can be fully effective in the States during the 20 months before the next general election. 2 years ago, our Council of Ministers made promises to these very hustings, promises which they have failed to deliver. Promise to control public spending and protect frontline services. Promise not to increase taxes on Middle Jersey. Promise to control population to maintain the quality of island life. I believe they have lost the public confidence. In 2017, the states will spend $789 million. The taxes and charges will produce only $715 million. We're living beyond our means. Frontline services, gardeners, cleaners, teachers, pensioners, childcare for young working families. These are all target for the planned cuts. And the Council of Ministers proposed £26 million of new charges starting in 2018, a 1% health charge, waste charge, hospital charge, all of which will hit Middle Jersey. Do they really think that we don't see through the dressed-up tax rises? And they committed to taxing non-residents corporations who trade locally without being taxed, disadvantages local business owners, and giving up on immigration control. And yet we see urban open spaces planned to be developed, and dense town cramming developments which will damage the quality of life in town. And ministers promised to end the state's spending silos. Yet our frontline service still carry excess layers of management and have suffered cuts year after year. We can no longer afford inflated chief officer pensions, salaries, and golf trips. So if elected, I will challenge ministers in the states to rethink all these policies and many more listed on my website. If elected, I will immediately lodge an amendment to the medium-term financial plan to halt the user pays charges until our spending house is in order and tax review of 010 is complete. I will resign my employment to concentrate on the task. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. I won't let you down.
Before we go further, I've been advised to advise yourselves that some candidates may choose to sit when they address you, preferably for the microphone or because they feel they'd rather do it that way. So can I now ask Mr. Mike Dunn to address you?
Yes, good evening. I am Mike Dunn, the Brexit man. My campaign is based on the United Kingdom decision to leave the European Union. Brexit, as it's called, and and how this might affect Jersey and us. And just bear in mind today, £11 billion fine came out of European Union for Apple and Ireland. I'm not sure whether it's both or either or not, but it's 11 billion. This is the sort of organisation we're dealing with. I am offering to serve for just 2 years, and that is when the next Jersey general election will take place in Jersey and all seats will become vacant again. It is also the time allowed for the UK to renegotiate the basis of its exit from Europe and our future relationships. Jersey's future will be laid down in those negotiations, although we have no direct voice in the proceedings since we are not a sovereign state. Listening to the other candidates in this by-election, one might suppose they are being elected for a lifetime because they promise to do so much. We have heard it all before in other elections, but now there is only one vacancy caused by the resignation of a senator who in 2 years discovered that she could achieve virtually nothing as an independent backbencher. There are already 48 serving members of the states, but any opposition to important Council of Ministers policies is inevitably doomed because dissenting voices are almost always outvoted. Take, for example, the MTFP, Midterm Financial Plan, which is the Bible of our Jersey government and will not be defeated within the state. That is the reality. In fact, it is already virtually impossible to mount any challenges to this extraordinarily complex document because the Council of Ministers have so reduced the timetable available once the state sittings resume. It is a stitch-up. Furthermore, as I've already repeatedly heard at scrutiny hearings, any member who challenges a revenue-raising policy under the MTFP, such as the health charge, must produce his or her own alternative policy to replace it. Even an organised opposition party would find this virtually impossible, especially with the available time. For any individual member from 45 of the 48 claimed to be independents, the task is hopeless, and the Council of Ministers has almost guaranteed majority on every important vote. On the other hand, I am campaigning specifically with regard to Jersey after Brexit, because this affects everybody in Jersey and many living outside, and I want to ensure that we are all properly represented in this complicated matter. That is a realistic objective. The MTFP was drafted before Brexit decision was made on 23rd of June. Inevitably, it is virtually ignored in that document. I believe that the MTFP will become a dead document once the Brexit negotiations are completed. And today we've heard that the economic forecasts are already in trouble. Thus, as is so often the case, it could be decisions made by others outside of Jersey that will determine the future of this island and all of us. Please read my manifesto, look at my blogs, and I hope you will see the importance of what I am trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian May.
Good evening, and thank you for taking the time to listen to us all this evening. I was born and educated in Jersey before qualifying as an English barrister and have spent the last 10 years working in a local law firm. I've had the privilege of chairing the local equality charity. I'm an invited governor of Rouge Bouillon School, and I set up the West of Town Community Association. I also had the privilege of leading the Save People's Park campaign, bringing together the public, states members and campaigners to successfully save People's Park. And I want to bring the same success from business and campaigning to my role if elected as senator. I believe the States needs a new candidate, one who hasn't had the opportunity to bring their ability, their skill and their perspective to the States Chamber. And I'll be a fresh pair of eyes with a fresh perspective on perennial problems. I've made 10 pledges in my manifesto. They're aspirational but achievable, and they represent a real promise to you across the next 2 years, and I'm ready and willing to be measured against them. I want to ensure that all island students have access to university funding. I want to challenge draconian measures in our health law, and want to optimise the use of states' assets without increasing taxation or introducing charges. I want to ensure our island culture is protected and celebrated. I want to ensure we're prepared for changing environmental factors and use e-government to give everyone access to online voting. Our natural environment is one of the most important assets that Jersey possesses. It attracts tourists, provides a home for wildlife, and is a basis for one of the most successful and enduring industries we have, agriculture. We need to ensure that we're prepared for changing climate and that could have a detrimental effect on our coastline, on our infrastructure and our agricultural industry. We need to enact the Future-Proofing Jersey programme, which includes changing cultural attitudes to climate change, even amongst states members. We've seen the detrimental effect that failing to respect our environment has, with St Owen's Bay carpeted in green sea lettuce. And I applaud the work that Save Our Shoreline are doing, exposing deficiencies in our waste treatment and encouraging a local industry to tackle the problem by planting oyster beds. We need to encourage environmental responsibility and sustainability, which includes growing more local crops, promoting meaningful recycling, and allowing the expansion of organic agriculture, including agritourism on the island. Some people say one new voice can't change anything in the States Assembly. I don't believe that. One voice can make a difference through debate, through constructive criticism, and through scrutiny. I want to be that voice in the Assembly for you, and I hope you'll give me the opportunity by voting for me on the 7th of September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator MEZEC.
Thank you, friends, ladies and gentlemen, for being here this evening. My name is Sam MEZEC, and I've been the Deputy of St Helier No. 2 for the past 2.5 years now. During the 2014 general election, ministers stood on these Hustings platforms and told you that our public finances were the envy of the world, and that if elected, they would promise to keep your taxes low and that they'd rein in wasteful public spending. Now, 2 years in, looking back at it and knowing what we know now, I think it's actually impossible to reach any conclusion other than this, and that is that you were lied to. Just weeks after they were elected, we found out that actually they'd racked up a public spending deficit of £145 million and began drafting up their plans to cut public services and introduce new taxes, all of which they'd actually promised you that they were against. In the past year in particular, we've seen £10 million cuts of support for the disabled, for broken families, and from pensioners, despite our shocking statistics on the proportion of pensioners living in relative low income. And all whilst this happens, it seems like every week we get a new report out about the out-of-control spending of senior civil servants and consultants on themselves. And report after report tells us that ministers are too beholden to their chief executives and are not focusing their efficiency savings on the bloated management levels. And instead, they're asking all of us to pay the price for their mistakes. They plan to introduce a new health tax with exemptions for the very wealthiest islanders so that they won't have to pay the full rate. They plan on sacking hundreds of workers providing frontline services for the public whilst leaving the bloated management levels unscathed. And they plan on slashing the salaries of newly qualified teachers while somehow expecting them at the same time to be delivering raising standards in education. And if you speak to many of these ministers privately, they'll actually tell you that they know the government isn't going to hit their own targets on deficit reduction. So I think that the timing of this by-election is actually perfect because it offers you an opportunity to cast a verdict on the performance of the Council of Ministers before they go ahead with the next phase of their plans. So I'm standing in this by-election because I want to seek a mandate from the whole island, not just St Helier, for an alternative vision to the one being proposed by the Council of Ministers. And that's a vision based on fair taxation, based on protecting our public services and ending the civil service gravy train, which is absolutely bleeding this island dry. And I think my record shows that I'm not afraid to stand up to the Council of Ministers. And if I'm elected in this midterm election, I think it sends a very strong message to them that they've lost the support of the public and they must change direction. Now, I can make an exclusive announcement to you here in St Owen's tonight. Today, Reform Jersey has lodged a proposition in the States to stop the health tax from being introduced. The tax is completely unnecessary. It's more bureaucracy and administration costs in the tax department, and they promised you they wouldn't do it. If I'm elected in this election, it will send the message to the government that they've lost the argument and they should drop those plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I have Stevie Ocean now, please?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be back in St Owen's. I used to live not far from here back in 1990, in fact, at Portinfer, and I was there for a few years. I had my own show at the Sunshine Hotel at the time, which unless it doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, we'll get on with the business, and first of all, I'm your establishment candidate. I'm truly a man of the people, a team player with a safe pair of hands. Now, what am I going to do with that safe pair of hands? I'm going to work with the Council of Ministers using diplomacy and tact to achieve something we need very, very badly indeed, and that is an immigration policy. This is going to be done by drawing up a proper criteria so we can move on in the future. We don't have the situation that we have at the moment where we've got too many people in the island, we don't know what's going on, and basically it needs to be done and needs to be done very, very soon. Everyone in Jersey needs to work together to make this island even greater than what it is. I heard today that these so-called experts are sort of forecasting that Jersey's economy is going to shrink. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you come to St Heliers Hustings on the 5th of September, and I will turn that on its head. Because what I have to say is going out to not only the local media, it's going out to the national media and the international media, like CNN, Sky News, Reuters, everybody. So if you can come, please do, because you're going to see history in the making. And as far as the experts are concerned, I'm sorry, they don't know what they're talking about. What I've done is amazing. Anyway, to continue, our island is 45 square miles. And unfortunately, we do have a population of between 100 to 103,000. It's putting pressure on all our services, hospitals, schools, even the police. There's 400 people to one police officer. What are we going to do about it? We could reclaim land from the sea. Now, is that going to be an environmental disaster? You know what it's, Eddie know on his sea letters. I've got plans for him and his sea letters as well. This is what comes back to the immigration policy. And the immigration policy is so, so important, and this is why it's got to be done. I have actually been a man of action and not a man of promises, and no disrespect to anybody on this table here. I've actually achieved things. I got in touch with Google in the United States of America. And on Google, on all our maps of the Channel Islands, it had the word UK, which after not the sort of argument you will see in my 500 words, I had removed. In fact, by threats and a bit more than that. Now, the situation is quite simple. I explained it to them that this could be a potential terrorist threat and also a backdoor to the UK, which I wouldn't allow. So, if you really want to see somebody make a difference, vote for me on the 7th of September. Vote for Ocean and keep the island afloat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Guy DeFay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I certainly can't claim to be a new face, but I do know the ropes, and I do listen to what the public have to say. And so far in the hustings, it's very clear that many of you are concerned about what happens to our young people when they try to get to university. Something has now been made very expensive by some rather strange decisions made by a previous Labour government. And I will add to my to-do list a scheme that will basically ensure that no talented young Jersey student should not have a full grant to ensure that they can do the course that they wish to do. And that can be easily achieved by setting aside a substantial annual fund, be competitive. Triple A's get the first crack, 2 A's and a B, and so on. It's a bit like a golf tournament. Some people may not make the cut, but nevertheless, I don't want to see anyone who's got talent disadvantaged because their parents can't afford it. Having said that, of course, I'm not going to stand here and say that taxpayers should support the wealthy. I think there should be a means test involved. But I will go this far. For those people who can afford it, I would also suggest that graduates returning to Jersey to employ their skills in this island should actually get tax breaks, irrespective of how they got their degree and who paid for it. If you come back, you should get a tax break to ensure that the money you spent is come back to you after you work in the island. Now, many of you will know that at the last Senatorial Hustings, I said this island was over £1 billion in debt. Council ministers on the platform went extraordinarily quiet. Now we know the real score. You can do the mathematics. The hospital probably cost 600 million. We've lent 250 million to Andium. Police station cost X, so it goes on. Liquid waste strategy, 100 million. Oh, and by the way, let's not forget the pension funds, not paid off till 2080 last time I looked. I think that you're being, again, led up the garden path by our government, who are doing an awful lot behind the scenes and not telling you what the true story is, because the true story is not that we are merely £145 million in structural deficit. The debt is far larger than that. I will strive to tell you what's going on straight, as I always have done. I have a number of other schemes I wish to put forward. These are not simply lame promises. The lame promise is to tell you I can sort out the council of ministers. I cannot do that on my own. I can talk to them, I can address them in the States, but under this collective responsibility, the council of ministers established is going to be a tough one to take on. But I simply say to you, I will be honest, straightforward, and do my best to take them on. And if you read my manifesto, I have some other policies that I think I can get through that will benefit everybody.
Thank you. Mary Oakliff-Berger.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mary. I'm a centenaire, a businesswoman. I sit on the board of directors for the Jersey Opera House, and I'm a mother. The States of Jersey needs a new face, someone who can bring passion, enthusiasm, and positivity, somebody who can be a strong leader, and somebody who can work with the present Council of Ministers. I have introduced what I call my legit strategies over the last few evenings. These are law, equality, good housekeeping, immigration, and tourism with trade. On immigration, we need a really good, robust, controlled immigration policy, and we need new ways to collect data on who is in Jersey, where they're living, and where they are working. It is important that we have a fully functioning working population so that we increase our tax income. This will ensure the safety of pensions, our hospital, our social security on into the future. I welcome the news of the small increase to pensions announced last week and the return of the Christmas bonuses. However, we need to keep this up. Our businesses, hospital and education department are concerned about recruitment, and I believe with the new immigration housing card app, we will have tighter controls. This won't be popular with everyone. However, we do need to work together to protect our island and to protect our vital services. The total finance raised in tourism in 2014 was over £250 million, and it doesn't take an accountant to tell us that our town feels very buzzy and busy this year, so our profits hopefully will have gone up for the island. In the mid-term financial plan, the government are planning on spending £65 million on redeveloping the airport. Now why, I'm asking the question. To me, this is a little bit like putting on an extension when the roof is actually leaking. We have a very functioning, fully functioning airport, but we do need some improvements in the baggage area. I also wonder about the question. The airport have made a profit this year of £8,107,000. Does this mean that we are being charged excessively for airport and landing charges? This actually concerns me. I would like to see flight and ferry subsidies so we can move in and out of our island at less cost. We need to recognise our airlines and our ferries as a lifeline service for business, for hospitals, transport, produce in and out of the island. We need to make sure our carriers are fully functioning and operational. And Condor and Flybe and Blue Island, are they fit for purpose? The recent cancellations suggest not. This service needs to be improved. Ladies and gentlemen, I also spoke about equality. We have 8 senatorial seats, 7 which are taken of men, and I hope the one remaining seat will be taken by a woman. And if I'd like you to consider voting for me, please, on the 7th of September. Thank you.
Hugh Raymond.
Good evening, St. Wands. I'm not sure about this. You seem to be so far away that it's the furthest the audience that we've been since all the Hustings. It's also refreshing to see so many people out, especially as you've got an important football match this evening, which you're trying to win, I gather, as well. But that's enough said about St. Wands, other than the fact that I'm here to tell you about myself. Some of you I know in the audience, some of you have met me, and some of you know the roles I already do, but some of you haven't. As you know, I'm the president of the Honorary Police Association, so I know your constable very well, so he knows that I'm not quiet and I'm always asking the questions. I'm also the chairman of the Sports Council in the island, so I see a lot of the sporting bodies. And also I sit as a new member, I was asked to become a board member of the Battle of Flowers this year. I also sit on as vice chairman of the racecourse, which is very much in your jurisdiction. The other thing about that is we're working with the Environment Department up at their land at the moment to make sure that the racecourse falls in line with all your environmental issues, which I think is great, and I think it's something that we should be very proud of. However, it's important that you select somebody that does know the island and has met the people and are dealing with the people. I've always done it from the outside, which is the volunteer network, which is what this island survives on, and I think it's very healthy that volunteers are so important to this island, and I wouldn't want to see that disappear. With all the work I've done in that scale and the work that I've done myself, being from employment terms, I had 25 years in the finance sector, and I have done a lot of work across the board with regards to meeting with people. However, it's very important that in 2 years we're going to be, one of us is going to be the new senator. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, there's going to be the medium-term plan. That medium-term plan is going to have austerity problems. There's no question about it. We've overspent, we have to cut back. So it's important that those questions are asked. But it's also very important that we look at all the things that are very important to us, which is education, health, taxation, job security, housing, and the elderly. There is no question that we've got to be looking after those. None of us are going to be able to change too much, and anybody that thinks he can is fooling himself. It's important that, though, you get somebody in there that is prepared to ask those questions that make it difficult for the ministers and assistant ministers. But the one thing that affects us all, which has been mentioned before, is immigration. I've tried to read that policy. I don't know what the policy is. What is the true number? What is the true population of the island? And what are the present rules? Are they adhered to? So with all this experience and with the ability to be able to get on and talk to people, and which I always have been able to, I would ask you on the 7th to consider and put a tick against my name. And I'll end up with a very, very sincere sentiment, and that is this is your island, it's my island, but at the end of the day, it's our island. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
Sarah Ferguson.
Thank you. Good evening, St. Juan. The Fiscal Policy Panel advised the Council of Ministers not to bring in new taxes. So we're now being blessed with taxes masquerading as charges for health, for hospital, liquid waste, solid waste, long-term care, and the proposed community infrastructure charge. Before 010, people paying tax at 20% paid 59% of the income tax collected. Today, those paying tax at the marginal rate pay over 50% of the income tax collected. Middle Jersey is carrying the burden of tax collected, and these charges will penalise Middle Jersey and the lower paid. In the 2012 strategic plan, the Chief Minister committed to undertake a post-implementation review of the new population law. We're still waiting. They talked about the new process enhancing the effectiveness of controls. Really? Growing businesses not in the finance industry are finding it impossible to get licenses. There was promised support. My panel advised the Council of Ministers that the interim policy was ineffective and there were no controls. Just like the 2015 budget, we called for a full debate on tax and expenditure policies. The ministers agreed but said the right time is before the next medium-term finance plan after the election. We said further work was needed to establish the scale of the structural deficit. They said don't make judgments until after the next medium-term finance plan, after the next election. I wonder why. Our advisors commented that if the States was a private company, a profits warning would have been issued. It's absolutely time that profits made in Jersey are taxed in Jersey. We need to find brownfield sites in the parishes so we can build affordable housing for the young and the old. If we don't, then the parishes will just wither and die. And we need to extend main services to all dwellings in the country parishes, especially Montmathieu and Mont-Rossignol. But the charges being proposed are moving the work of parishes to central government. This is undermining the parish system. Last year, there was a central account for the rates. what's in store next. I would amend the proposed, if I was elected, I would amend Reform's amendment to ensure that we did have the tax review before the charges are brought in. And it's still possible to make a difference through scrutiny questions and propositions. Please remember, your vote is your voice. Please use it, preferably for Sarah Ferguson, but you must use it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Nicola Cornu.
Good evening, I'm Nicola Cornu. Yesterday I was out canvassing in St Helier and I knocked on the door of a flat, and it was a coloured gentleman, and he was an accountant, and he was very keen to get registered to vote. He'd been here 8 years, and I started explaining the political system to him in Jersey. I said, well, it's a bit of a sort of one-party state, and we have elections and nothing changes. And he said, oh, that's just like where I come from, Zimbabwe. And today, Mike Dunn and I were on the BBC Radio Jersey phone-in programme, Election Special. And we had a lady who rang in from St Clement's. And she said a phenomena that I hear time and time again on the doors when politicians come. They say one thing and they do another. And she was considering not voting at all, because she was so profoundly disillusioned by her 2 representatives in St Clement's. And I said to her, basically, hold on, do vote, because it's important, because 60 to 70% of the island don't vote, and because good people don't vote, we get bad governments. And what she was expressing was that profound divide between the people and the political elites in this island. That political elite which we know will not modernise, will not democratise, will not change anything. They won't change the state's assembly, they won't change the electoral system. They prefer the gerrymandered thing that they have now. They are representing only themselves. They're following a policy called austerity. And austerity is a policy designed to protect the incomes of the rich. What is austerity? Cutting public services, cutting jobs in the public sector, and raising taxes on low and middle income earners. Now, when I knock the doors in St Helier, the people understand that. They feel it in their pay packets, and they're in circumstances that their salaries are not going up, that prices are rising rapidly, that the cost of the rents are rising. And when I talk to pensioners, they say, we're just getting by, with the emphasis on just, because things are tightening and they're having to make choices between eating and maybe paying a bill, and they have to juggle the two. Jersey is profoundly dividing. If you vote for one of the 3 major establishment candidates who you would probably be voting for, be careful, because they will just be snuggling up to the Council of Ministers and be following whatever policies are pursued by the Council of Ministers. There is an opposition. Vote for it, particularly at the forthcoming general election in 20 months' time, and let's see if we can reform, democratise and modernise the island, which we love so much, before it falls into disrecord and disharmony and is a place we no longer wish to live in. Thank you.
Okay, this evening Mr. Corey has kindly agreed to go around with the roving mic. When asking your questions this evening, could you please state your name first and keep your question brief? The candidates will answer 2 questions at a time, and we will rotate the questions, the candidates. So can I now invite questions from the floor, please?
Thank you. Could I ask the candidates...
Could I have your name, please, sir?
Sorry, my name is Rizzoli. I live in the parish in St Helier. Could I ask the candidates whether they believe withholding the truth is exactly the same as lying? Thank you.
Could I ask Mike Dunn to start, please? Oh, sorry, another question. Beg your pardon, another question, sorry.
Hi, my name's John Tarrant. It's not so long ago that we were in this hall discussing whether or not we should have constables in the chamber, and I'd like the various candidates to explain whether they would support constables remaining in the chamber or not, and why.
Okay, thank you. Mike Dunn? So,
Yes, regarding Mr. Rizzoli's question, withholding the truth, same as that. Well, it's rather a strange question, isn't it? Because the independent care inquiry, which has been going on for the past 18 months, is all about people not always telling the truth. So whether they were telling lies is another matter, but it's cost the island £23 million, so the effect can be devastating for a community such as ours. So there's an accumulation there of 50 years of not telling the truth. Whether that's withholding the truth, telling lies. Obviously, some of those people were telling lies. But a lot of it is just misuse of their office or not doing their job properly, not looking after children, not reporting the offences when they were committed, trying to cover them up. Now, I don't know if that's what the sort of thing Mr. Rizzoli's got in mind, or whether he's thinking of more general things. I don't know. He'll have to come back and tell us more further. Constables, I led the No campaign for constables. The constables virtually independently. I asked the greffier, I said, is anybody leading this campaign to combat the Yes campaign, which was the establishment view? And he said, you can do it if you want, if nobody better comes along. So nobody better came along, so I took it on virtually single-handed. I ran the campaign, and I got 9,000 votes. I didn't, or the campaign, no, constables should not automatically be in the States, attracted 9,000 votes. So there's a substantial feeling out there, it's not a majority, but there's a substantial feeling out there that constables shouldn't be. And it's a part of a package of reforms which ought to take place, and hopefully, as part of the Brexit thing, when Brexit rolls on, hopefully people will start to look at these things as part of the reforms that are forced upon Jersey, not very voluntarily from outside, but I hope these sort of reforms can come from within. So.
Thank you. Christian May.
Thank you. It's certainly a particularly interesting question regarding withholding the truth and whether it is the same as lying, especially, I imagine, within the context of the hustings. I think it would be fully wrong for someone to get up and lie to you directly and then change their position as soon as they got into the State's chamber. And I wouldn't want to see anyone on this panel doing that, whoever is elected. And I think that's why having the hustings is so important, because it gives you the opportunity to cross-examine us and to pull out of us the answers. On a legal basis, it becomes more complex because from a criminal context, you can be prosecuted for lying, and especially in the context of fraud, but withholding the truth is a very difficult legal area. As regards the constables, I respect their office very much. I think they fulfil a very important role within the parish. We've had a referendum on this issue just 2 years ago, and the public have made a decision on it, and I want to respect that decision. I do think, however, that we will have to look at reforming the Assembly in the near future. We need to look at the equality of the size of the districts and the equality of representation within them, and I think that is something that will change. And at that point, I think it will be appropriate to again ask the question of the people of the island: do you want to see the constables remaining there, or do you want to see them purely fulfilling a parish role, which I think they will always have, and be a voice for the parish activities? Thank you.
MEZEC.
There is a principle in criminal law which says that it is possible to lie by omission. Where that applies depends purely on the circumstances in which that omission is made. As Christian said, it can sometimes be a little bit of a grey area, but there is a principle in criminal law that you can be lying by the fact you didn't say something when you ought to have said something. I actually used the word lie in my opening speech because I think the Council of Ministers were deliberately dishonest to the public at the last election. They knew at that point that they had racked up a £145 million public deficit. You don't serve in government for 3 years without realising that the payments aren't balancing up by such a drastic amount like that. You either realise it and they deliberately withheld it from you, or they didn't realise it, in which case they were never fit to be in government in the first place. I think the public were certainly misled at the last election. In terms of the roles of the constables in the States, I have always believed that Jersey democracy will be best served at some point in the future having a States Assembly with only one type of elected member elected in equal-sized constituencies across the board where every single voter, no matter where you live, has an equal vote. I accept, though, that we've had a referendum on the constables, which means that, pragmatically, my ideal situation is now impossible, at least for the foreseeable future, until the public change their mind on that question. Therefore, what I'd like to see is a form of reform of the composition of the Assembly, which makes the distribution of deputies in the Assembly much fairer than it currently is, because there is a lot of unfairness in the system. We should maintain the role of the constable, and I think for the foreseeable future we will also have to maintain the role of senators. It's not my ideal situation. I'm simply basing that on the fact that that is clearly what the public mood is at the moment, and it would be wrong for elected representatives to ignore what the public think. But in the long term, I think we'll need to have one type of elected member in equal-sized constituencies.
Stevie Ocean.
Thank you. Gino, very interesting question this is. First of all, and I'll bring this up again, who runs the island? Is it the Council of Ministers, or is it their chief officers that bully them? Now, I've actually turned around and said if I can ascertain this, I'd actually exile all the chief officers to the Ecrios, and they can go over on the Condor, and it might conk out halfway across. We'll never see them again. When it comes to lying and withholding information from people, it depends on what the circumstances are. I mean, in the UK, everybody was lied to about Brexit, and it turned on their heads. They thought they could gain control. They thought they could do this. They thought they could do that. And in fact, they can do nothing. Being outside the EU as we are, I knew exactly what was going on. And nobody would listen to me. I had a word with Boris Johnson. I had a word with Nigel Farage. I said, you're idiots. I said, first of all, you're giving yourselves a sack. Nigel Farage gave himself the sack, and everybody in the MEPs, you know, in the European Parliament, are saying, what are you doing here? You know, you don't want to be here, so what are you doing here now? So we'll have to see how all this pans out, and maybe it might be turned on its head. Let's hope so, because it affects this island, as Mike has said, very, very badly. On the point of view of the connotables remaining in the States, well, actually, there's a couple of ideas here. First of all, when I was chairman of the Jersey Rights Association and its founder, as well as being in other offices within the JRA, I was involved with the machinery of government. I just found a document at home which is sort of like this. So I would actually like to say that the connotables do a very, very good job and should remain in the States of Jersey. And we were looking at one aspect and one aspect alone, getting rid of the deputies and having a senatorial island-wide mandate with just 28 senators. And that could be possible. Thank you very much.
Guy de Fay.
Well, clearly there is a difference between withholding information and lying, because there are circumstances where it may be in the public interest to withhold information. On the other hand, there may be circumstances where it's completely wrong in terms of the public interest to withhold information. It's a subjective thing, and I think you have to make your own mind up in terms of the circumstances. But I'd like to turn to the Connotab question. If anyone's really interested in reform in this island, my submission to the Jersey Electoral Commission is still available. If you look it up on Google, Guy de Fay, Jersey Electoral Commission, very comprehensive document. Some of you may remember many years ago, we actually had a scientific poll conducted by Murray, who asked a selected group of sufficient numbers, what do you want? And they said, we want senators number 1, constables number 2, deputies number 3, and general election number 4. So what did the States Assembly get on and do? They gave us a general election and messed up all the rest of it. I am conflicted in this situation to some extent because I personally would like to abolish all deputies and go to island-wide mandate for just about everywhere, but retain the parochial representation of the connétables in the states, keeping it simple, 12 connétables, 28 senators. And that is primarily because I believe that local people have got fed up of having their choice of politicians determined by where they live. Because depending where you live, these are the only people you can vote for. I think that's got to change. I don't know when we're going to change it because we've taken years already, but that's the way I want to go.
Mary O'Cleef-Berger.
If I could just come to the connétable question first. I think it's very sad to look at changing something that has evolved since 1257. I think it would be very sad to change that. I have been working as a centenaire voluntary in the parish of St. Saviour, and I actually now understand the role of the connétable much more than I did before. Because before it was a little bit elusive and I didn't really quite get it, but now I do. And as a result, I would be very reluctant to change the connétable. I think they do a great job, and I think it's really important that they kept abreast of all the activities that are going on in the States. I think it's important that they represent their parishioners in the States, and I think it's a very vital link. So I would be very reluctant if the question was asked again to go back and change them. On the question of lying or just withholding the truth, luckily I've actually never been in the position where I've had to withhold the truth for some reason. So I'm really glad, but I've not been tested. But I am being tested tonight, so now I have to think, what would I do? It would depend on the circumstances. If somebody was diagnosed with a terminal illness and you were told that giving them the diagnosis was maybe going to be harmful to their immediate term health, would you have to think about that if you felt their reaction would be bad? So there's, you'd have to judge each circumstance case by case. Thank you.
Hugh Raymond.
Yeah, but you can't do that because I sit on the prosecution group. The trouble is you can only withhold the truth if you're asked the question. But if you don't know what the question is, how do you know whether you're withholding the truth? I'm not sure where you're coming from on it. And we've had this, whether it's in, and my colleagues on the right will know far better than me, whether you have it in the magistrates' court or the royal court. You don't know anybody's withholding the truth until the question's asked. So I'm not sure how you can then take that further and say you're lying, because the only lying comes out because you know that you're holding the truth. I don't want to go into it because I think there's a legal implication in what you're trying to get at there. But with regards to the connétables, as you know, the connétables lost their policing powers over the last 12 months, which has given them much more freedom within the parishes. The thing about the connétables, and I readily admit on most occasions that I am not a local person, but I think it's one of the best situations that you have, as long as the connétables are looking after their parish. I think what has happened in the past, let's say they've gone into different roles within the states and have forgotten the role that they play within the parish. The system that is evolved over many years, the same as what Mary has just said, is perfect for the island. However, I do think that we have to look at the voting situation with regards to how we elect our members to go into the states. I think 49 people in the states with a population of 100,000 is bigger than most borough councils with a population of 50,000. I think the whole situation with regards to the election of people that represent us in the states has to be looked at, but I would certainly keep the constables in the state, providing their role was covered with regards to their parish. Thank you.
Sarah Ferguson.
Thank you. I've already, in my initial address, I have in fact mentioned the fact that the Council of Ministers were perfectly aware of the state of our finances before we went into the last election. And I heard some of them stand up there and say, what's all this rubbish about a structural deficit? So we were on record as having said it, so because it was true and it needed to be said. And you've got to face up to things. You can't just kick them under the carpet. You've got to face up to it, and then you stand a chance of sorting it out. Now, as far as the Conitabs go, Tom Passé, they used to hold parish assemblies if something very controversial was coming up in the States. And sadly, this seems to have fallen into disrepute. And it all starts cutting the links between the Conitab and the parish. You know, they need to do this more, I think. Some of the Conitabs are getting so involved with island matters and being in the Council of Ministers that they do lose touch with their parishes, which is an absolutely desperate thing. And, you know, under these charges we're getting, as I've said, some of the functions of the parish are going to be transferred to the centre. And I think this is another retrograde step. I mean, look what happened to welfare. We transferred it to the centre and it's ballooned. I think we ought to look at the Guernsey approach for the reform because they now have, something like 38 deputies, 3 large constituencies. I think we're going to be, 30 members, 12 Conitabs, 3 large constituencies, or all Ireland. Thank you.
Nicola Cornu.
Politicians don't lie, do they? You know they do. Why do we find that inconsistent? Well, I think Gino's question is about virtue, and it's an inheritance from the Enlightenment. Politicians particularly in France, of the French Republic, if you remember those profound speeches to the convention, the Dantons or Robespierre's and so on, they're talking about virtue. They consider that they personify the people. What they say is profound, and it has to be the truth. But unfortunately, as we know, politics and politicians in our modern world are corrupted by power, by money, and the interests that they represent. Where is virtue? I put that question to you. As for the constables, no, they shouldn't be there because it's part of the gerrymander. Parishes can deliver public services at a local level, but constables should not be in the State's Assembly ex officio by virtue of their office. Look at the last elections. 10 out of 12 did not face contested elections. The one I think that occurred in St. Wands was the first in 109 years. Something is profoundly broken. That's fine for the political establishment. They love all that. No elections, no accountability, no democracy. Wonderful. And I believe we should have one category of states member, all elected on the same day, in constituencies of equal size. That's so obvious to anyone who comes from the outside. They achieved it in somewhere like Bermuda, for example. They even changed the names of their districts to get rid of the old names of the slave masters, and they profoundly reformed their system. But that took a Bermuda Labour Party to achieve that. Thank you.
John Young.
Gino's question is not just a moral issue. It's about what's at question here is the whole belief of the public, pretty well everywhere in the Western democracies, in the integrity of politicians. I've just been reading a book which sums it up by Nick Rainsford called Substance, Not Spin. And I think Jersey has got the same disease. What we are fed on is a selective diet of selective information, where the bad news is not mentioned or not emphasised, and it's left to us to find it. That is misleading. So it is not lies, but it does serve, unless something's done, to undermine public confidence in government, which is hugely damaged for our democratic system. So I think that's an issue that you have to choose when you elect members. On the question of the role of the constables, the states unquestionably needs reform. The public favour all Ireland elections strongly, but it's no question if every member were elected on an all Ireland mandate, what we would have is all the candidates there and us, the electorate, here. It would be impossible. So we have to find other ways. Last year we had a process. We went through a very painful referendum, and the majority of people were absolutely wedded to the importance of the parishes to island life. But we were divided on whether the constables should have an automatic role in the States. My view was negative on that, because having sat in the States and seen their role and seen constables as former ministerial officers, I was against it. But I don't want to go through that again. We've had the referendum. In my view, that door's closed. We have to respect it. What we now have to do is to find a way of looking at the structure of our electoral system, some positions on all island and some on a revised option B. I hope the PPC have the courage to come forward. If they do, I'll support it. If not, it's not a main issue for me, I'm afraid, not in 20 months.
Thank you. Right, can we have another 2 questions from the floor, please? Gentleman in the front. Just gentleman here. Yes, please.
Mark Foskett. C'est les bienvenus à Saint-Ouen. Can I ask the candidates if they could paint me a picture in words of life, work, leisure, government in a genuinely sustainable future Jersey? Thank you.
And the gentleman just here.
Robert Kish. Would each candidate please state what their educational and professional qualifications are?
Thank you. Christian May.
Looking to a genuinely sustainable future Jersey, I think it's a difficulty to picture it at the moment, and I think we need to take action if we do actually want to achieve that. I think we need to recognise that Jersey faces problems, especially with regards to climate change. The Environment Department, as you will know, produced a report called Future Proofing Jersey, and it called on all people to look at the risks that Jersey faces and how we can make ourselves more sustainable. I think we need to look to producing more food on island. I think we definitely need to look to our traffic problems, hopefully by way of introducing more electric cars to the roads. I think we also need to look carefully at the way we're generating power on island as well. It's not an easy scenario, especially with the amount of imports that Jersey has in terms of food and in terms of goods. One of the things that will possibly push us towards being more sustainable is the fact that we have troubles with our sea links and troubles with our air links, and we need to make sure that we are prepared for that change. When it comes to my educational and professional qualifications, I was educated at De La Salle College in Jersey. I studied law at the University of Nottingham and qualified for the bar vocational course at Nottingham Trent University. I was called to the English bar in 2007 as a barrister. And I think that's about the full of that. Thank you.
Sam MEZEC.
In reverse order, I was elected to the States of Jersey at the age of 23, so I would be lying if I tried to tell you I've had some sort of amazing career, heading some big business or anything. I simply haven't. Elected at the age of 23, shortly after graduating from the University of Westminster, where I studied law. Incidentally, I did spend a lot of my time working for Baker & Partners law firm. Christian actually gave me that first job, so thanks, Christian. I do appreciate that. And as a States member, I feel like I've made a real impact in the 2.5 years I've been there. The JP did their coverage a few weeks ago where they showed what contributions States members had made over the past year. I've asked more questions than almost all other States members put together. I've brought lots of propositions in that time, some of which have been successful. There are lots of States members who really do none of that. So yeah, I'm not going to lie and tell you I've got a big business background. I was elected at the age of 23, and I think it's really important that the States has that diversity in it, and people from the younger ages are represented in there. In terms of what I think life in a sustainable Jersey in the future would be, I don't believe in utopia for a start, but I think we should always strive to live in as perfect a society as possible. I think in the long term, there is no reason why Jersey couldn't be completely self-sufficient in terms of producing energy here. We have absolutely fantastic natural resources here, particularly the tidal ranges. I would like, in the long term, to see Jersey making all of its own electricity here by utilising our natural resources. I think the biggest stumbling block there is that to do that would probably cost hundreds of millions of pounds upfront in investment, and when we've got the current public spending deficit, the chances of that happening are virtually nil. However, I think we should still look into it, to be perfectly honest. When we're spending large amounts of money on the hospital, large amounts on police station, well, why shouldn't we also be looking at renewable energy as well? It makes perfect sense to do so, and it's good for the planet. So I think that's something I'd love to see in the future. And it matters because I've got a long life ahead of me, hopefully, to enjoy it and be on that planet, which is having its environment currently ruined.
Stevie Ocean.
Right, well, let's go back to a long time ago in the 60s. I went to Upton House School, which is not there anymore. To give you some idea, Lord Alan Sugar went to Brookhouse and also didn't get any qualifications like myself. I didn't get one GCSE. I then went to work as a black and white printer and trainee photographer at a place called Golderstadt. I then went to the Telegraph. And I started as a postal boy and ended up being one of the bosses. I got my boss's job. I was the youngest executive in Fleet Street at 23 years of age. The average age of executives when the job I did was 40. And I became one of the most successful salesmen in Fleet Street ever. Because I did a deal with Freddie Laker and Plessy for £7 million. Now, I've been in Jersey for over 32 years, and I've done an awful lot of things here. I speak fluent Portuguese. I learned that in 8 weeks. I taught myself. I can read and write. And I also speak 5 other languages as well. Not fluently, but I can get by on them. Other things I've done, I was the founder of the Jersey Rights Association, and also because I wanted to learn from the bottom end, I went as a committee member, then I became honorary secretary, then I became chairman, and I became deputy chairman. I was also vice chairman of the high-rise panel for the island, and I did the work at the Cedars at a cost of 6.5 million. If you look at the Cedars in town, it looks nothing like a state's property. It looks like a luxury block of apartments, and I was responsible for that. I've also taken people to Jack's tribunals and won on their behalf. As far as state and ability is concerned, very, very briefly, this will happen when I make my announcement on September the 5th at the St Helier Hustings. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, FAYE.
I do apologise for not knowing the up-to-date nomenclature, but basically 15 O-levels, 5 A-levels, Bachelor of Arts Honours degree in Law, Kingston University, President of the Student Union, branch chairman of the Channel Islands National Union of Journalists. I regrettably don't have professional qualifications in international television news, but I was producer, news editor and programme presenter for the ITN World News, 150 million viewing households worldwide, second only to CNN across the globe. And if there was any plaudits, Walter Cronkite once turned around to my anchorman, Richard Lindley, and said, Richard, there isn't a serious foreign correspondent in Washington who does not watch your show. So that was good enough for me. And in respect of life in sustainable Jersey, I really haven't got enough time to go into that in a minute. But broadly speaking, I would like to see us taking the landmass much more seriously, almost like a natural nature reserve, as opposed to a building site. I would like to see us actually trying to move the living space offshore via reclamation so we can free up the green of the island. I would like to see the island beautiful with wildflowers and not monocultures in agriculture. And of course, I would like to see all sorts of marine stuff going on. Marine energy, I'd like to see the fishing absolutely take off. I think the oyster industry can rival new potatoes and so on. It will be idyllic, and I hope we can all live in it very soon.
Mary O'Keefe Berger.
Yes, hi, I'll just touch on the education question first. I was convent educated in Dublin. I then went off to Edinburgh University where I studied dental hygiene diploma. I then went to the Royal College of Physicians and did multiple courses in facial aesthetics. I then went to Aberdeen University, did a master's degree in European Cultural Studies with management. Work-wise, I've owned my own dental practice and facial aesthetic practice. I've set up my own arts festival. I've owned my own property company at the moment in finance, which finds properties for trust companies and individuals. We also do global citizenship and residency, and I'm a board member of the Jersey Opera House. On to the government and how I would see a sustainable future. There's three things I'd like to implement straight away. One is 3 types of bins in every household, one for paper, one for bottles, and one for household food. And that they be collected in 3 different types of bins. They do this very well in Dublin. It's become, every household has it now, and I'd like to see that for Jersey. I think that'd be one little step in the right direction. I also would approve in the mid-term financial plan the new sewerage works. And the reason for this, that we do know that our own bodies are producing too much nitrates, which is contributing to the sea lettuce problem. So obviously this would be one way to hopefully solving that problem. I'd also like to see us being able to get more electricity from the new wind turbines that are going to be off the coast of France, because I think this is the way forward with energy, and hopefully we will be able to have more cost-effective electricity for the island and much more sustainable for the future. And one last point is I would like to see more education in our schools for children to be taught more about the environment and to be a little bit more aware than maybe I was as a child. Thank you.
Hugh Raymond.
Yes, I'll quickly run through that. I qualified as a teacher. My subject was history. I stayed in for 2 years. I then was on one of these fast-track schemes to join a National Building Society. I was senior management in a National Building Society in the UK, looking after all the branches in the UK. I left there, I didn't leave there, sorry. Whilst there, I became a member of South West Arts. I became a director of a national theatre in the UK, and I was one of the first board members of a national health trust, which were established in 1988, and I became vice chairman of the Gloucestershire Ambulance National Health Trust. Having left there, I came here and I sit on 3 boards with regards to the work that goes on in Jersey. Most of it, all of it, is volunteers. I'm not paid for anyone, and I have basically carried on from where I was in the UK. With regards to your question, sir, like Guy, I'd like to take time. The biggest problem I find is that we have an island, and we know what the size is. We have 32,000 cars. Is that sustainable? Where are we going with 32,000 cars? Do we need 32,000 cars? We have to look after our island, because if we don't look after our island, then we're all going to suffer. We have the same problem. Our age, we're living longer, we have to look after ourselves longer, and we have to make sure that those people can enjoy life. And that means from 0 to 90, because the 70 now is 50, isn't it? And 90 is going to be 70. So I think that we have to look at the whole structure of the island if we're going to move forward and we can have a sustainable living. Thank you.
Sarah Ferguson.
Right. Yes, I qualified with an undergrad degree of a BSc Tech specialising in power engineering. I did a practical apprenticeship. I know how important apprenticeships are. I had a whale of a time, and I can do a mean bit of welding. I gained my qualification as a chartered electrical engineer, and I'm a member of the institution. And then I moved into finance, and I'm a member of I was a member of the Investment Analysis Society and also the Compliance Society. In between times, I went to Columbia University in New York and took my MBA in business, specializing in finance and marketing. I'm currently a director of the Biarritz Hotel. I'm a trustee of Age Concern. I'm a deputy chairman of the Sea Cadets. I was a centenaire in St. Brellard's. You name it. I seem to have my nose in it. We need, as far as the environment goes, the first thing we need is a planning department which respects the environment. In St. Brellard's at the moment, we have people cutting down trees in the Coastal National Park and planning do nothing about it. We have people... There's one house that was built 5 metres away from where it should have been built according to the plans. Now, if you and I had done that, we'd be up in front of everybody. But, oh no, they've just got a retrospective planning application in. Yes, I think renewables are fabulous, but they've got to be commercially viable. We cannot put old people into fuel poverty subsidising renewables, which they're doing in the UK. We need to have renewables that are actually economic.
Nicola Cornu.
Mark, did I hear you utter the words life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness from the American Constitution? The Council of Ministers only wants to sustain one thing in this island, that's finance and making money. As for educational achievement of states members, which I think is the question Mr. Kitch was alluding to, of course the standards are very low, and he's quite right to point it out. Because the hallmarks of the British ruling class are, of course, public school, Oxbridge and the Guards. Public school, well, we've got the Crown officers, they probably qualify for that. We've got Oxbridge, we've got the Constable of St. Helier, and no Guards, we might have the odd captain from the army occasionally. My own education, Victoria College. I'm about to answer it. Yep. And I've answered it in a different way by broadening it out and making it more profound. But thank you for asking the question. My own education, Victoria College, Warwick University, having read history. I'm sorry I didn't go to Oxbridge. And I'm a solicitor qualified, and I practice in the City of London, litigation and commercial law. Came back to Jersey, English solicitors, worked for Trust and Company Administration. Sorry, I haven't achieved anything else since that. Oh, I was the deputy of St Helier District No. 1, and I was very proud of that. Great achievement. Thank you.
John Young.
Robert, I was a London boy, went to a grammar school on direct grant, left school at 16 with 8 O-levels, and picked up my education years later with an Open University degree in environmental science in the 1970s through self-study. And through self-study, I then gained eventually a fellowship of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. I have a postgraduate diploma in international compliance gained in the last 10 years, and the States fortunately paid for me to go to the University of Oxford 3 months to pick up a certificate in management. Apart from that, obviously I've had 14 years doing town planning, which at my age I felt I didn't really bother to go and do another professional qualification. Oh, by the way, I missed out my RYA in power boats and day skippers. I've headed up a law firm, worked in a trust company, and chaired the Arts Centre. So I think that's a pretty wide range of things which I bring to the task. Now, Mark, I mean, you've asked a huge question here. I've written down living within our means, because I think that Jersey absolutely doesn't. And I don't just mean our money, I mean our natural resources and within the physical island, and to leave the environment in a better state than we found it. So, for example, at the moment we're treating it as a consumer commodity. Yes, the planning department is not functioning as well as it has done in the past, and it's a real shame because our island has done very well in conserving our beautiful countryside for decades. But trust me, unless we swing things back to where they should be, it will deteriorate. So sustainable Jersey, I want to see a decent social mix, expenditure and income in balance, population in balance, a cultural mix where people are valued, and stress is management. Local sustainability of food, there's a huge list, and utility scale renewable energy and electric vehicles. Government policies to encourage that.
Mike Dunn.
Yes, it's nice to have a little dream, isn't it? And then let the candidates talk about things which there's not a hope they're going to do in the next 2 years. So it's all very nice stuff. And we could wish that Jersey was Belle-Île and had a population of about 5,000 and it didn't have a finance industry and you could make a living by a bit of fishing, a bit of farming. You could wish that that's not how it is. The fact of the matter is, has been here's at the other end of the table, the that the island is dominated by a finance industry. And finance industry ultimately is incompatible with these simple little humble activities which don't produce enough money. And I recorded, and I did the other week, an excellent lecture by a guy who was a socialist farmer, which is a rare breed, at the What's for Dinner series of lectures. Very interesting. He said, you can't just fiddle with reform of farming. You can't go and just fiddle. You've got to change the whole society because it's part of it. And that's exactly what the problem is. Brexit, my favorite subject, could decimate your farming industry. It could do that. It could stop you exporting potatoes even to England. It could do that. That could be one of the results. You could find yourself not being able to call Jersey potatoes Jersey Royals. You could find yourself having to import or having to allow other milk to be imported. All these things could happen and be possible, and very quickly, the farming, the background of this island, the backdrop, the scenic backdrop, which is what it's becoming, a tourist thing. It's becoming a backdrop to our way of life, that the farmers maintain this green and pleasant land, superficially green and pleasant, because we know it's polluted and it's killing us with the water supply and all these other things, but superficially it looks attractive. This is what these are parts of the myths of what we have to try and maintain, but it's all incompatible with finance because finance creates so much wealth which cannot be generated from the land. That's one of the great sadnesses of the situation. Unfortunately, Jersey and the population, to support 100,000 people from these sort of activities, not possible. We can't be a sustainable, self-sufficient community. It won't happen.
Okay, can we have another 2 questions from the floor, please? Gentlemen, just, yep.
Ian Brandon, I'd like to ask a question about GST. The candidates' views on whether they would maintain it at the same level, even increase it, reduce it, introduce exemptions, or get rid of it altogether. And if it's getting rid of it altogether or any of the exemptions, that would presumably create a new black hole of about, I believe, about £80 million a year. How would they propose to fill that? Thank you.
Another question, please. Young gentleman over there.
Nathan LeBlanc. I'd like to know what personal qualities the candidates would bring to their role if they were elected.
Sorry, Mr. Corey. Mr. Corey, have the question again, please. No, the question again. Question from the young gentleman again.
Oh, another one. Oh, there we are. Sorry, what personal qualities would you bring to your role and to the senatorial body of Jersey if you were elected?
Thank you. Sam MEZEC.
Thank you. On GST was one of the big election issues at my very first election as a 17-year-old, because I was part of the first batch of 16 and 17-year-olds. I have always thought that GST is inherently an unfair and regressive tax, because the lower your income, the larger proportion of your income goes to GST, whereas the wealthier you are, the lower proportion goes to it. I think taxes, generally speaking, should be the opposite way round there. So I've never, ever been in favour of GST, and in the States, when it has come up previously to support exemptions, whether it's for utility bills or whether it's for food, I've always voted in favour of those. I think, generally speaking, we're going to need, at some point in the very near future, a proper tax review to basically look at what public services do we need to fund and how are we going to generate the revenue to do that. We've got a massive black hole in public finances at the moment. We need to sort that out. GST, I think, has actually been problematic and has only really came into force to fill the black hole created by 0-10. I think we need to look towards getting more businesses back into that 10% bracket of 0-10, and I support lifting the cap on social security contributions. So those are just 2 ways that you could fill any black hole potentially by reducing GST or introducing exemptions. In terms of my personal qualities, I've been in the States for 2 years now, and I have always been at the forefront of opposing what I believe to have been the most regressive and sometimes, frankly, immoral policies that the Council of Ministers has pursued. I've opposed every single cut to support for the poorest and most vulnerable people in Jersey. And from a senatorial position, I believe that I would have a much greater mandate to propose alternatives to that. So those are alternatives based around a fairer tax system, based around protecting our public services. With that mandate, I believe that I would be able to be a lot more persuasive in the States. I've won quite a lot of the propositions I brought to the States. I want to bring more, and I want to stand a better chance of doing that. Thank you.
Stevie Ocean.
Well, on the point of GST, the revenue from GST, I believe, was £149 million, which there won't be any black hole, and I can't work out why there is one. We do need, unfortunately, taxes. I mean, if you go to America and you buy a radio, you pay a tax on a local basis, and then you pay a state tax. So taxes are necessary, unfortunately, and it's one of these things. On the point of personal qualities, well, I've got a lot of personal qualities. And by the way, sir, I must ask you a question. If you go to vote.je, click on the link to LinkedIn, you can see my full CV. It would take far too long for me to read it out. Okay? So, if you'd like to do that. Right, on personal qualities, I've got a lot of personal qualities that I could bring to the States. And first of all, let me explain to you, even though I'm the establishment candidate, I'm far from a yes man and far from a lapdog, and I think people have got to know this. Respect is very, very necessary within the States Chamber, and to achieve what I want to achieve, I have to work with diplomacy and tact to get what you want, because my concerns are your concerns, and they're our concerns. And we've got to work together to get through these things. Thank you very much.
Guy DeFay.
Well, I happened to be in the States when we introduced GST, and I attended all the workshops and looked at all the alternatives. And I can assure you, sitting here this evening, that the alternatives were not nearly as palatable as GST. It has some downsides, but if you recall, because it was understood that it might play harder on people at the lower income end of the spectrum, special allowances were made. Initially £3,000 income tax allowance for people who were low earners. I would not raise GST above the current level, and I would remind everyone that the whole point it is at a relatively low level is because it has no exemptions. And as soon as you start introducing exemptions, things get extremely difficult very quickly. As to the personal qualities, I would hope to add to the States Assembly. One would quite clearly be a skill in presentation and debating. Like many of you, I've spent a lot of my time outside the States shouting at the radio when the broadcast has gone across Radio Jersey. And I think probably after many years in journalism where one of the tricks, one of the skills you have is looking for the angle on a story. I have always developed, looking at propositions, policies, strategies, an element of lateral thinking to go, is this actually the right thing to do? Is there another way of doing it? Is there a better way? I think I can usefully bring that skill to the States, which I have to say I have done in the past.
Mary O'Keefe-Berger.
On the question of GST, the forecast for June 2016 was £83,334,000. I think it would be very difficult to get rid of GST now that we're used to that income coming in, and it's certainly been allocated towards future plans and future expenditure. So if I had a magic wand, I'd like to get rid of it, and the reason I would say that is because I've spoken to some retailers in Jersey and St Helier who actually absorb the GST costs themselves, and they don't add it on to the price of the products for their clients. And I was quite surprised when I heard that they were still doing this, but this is actually costing them personally a significant amount of money. And I'm for small businesses, and I want to support small businesses. And so if I could get rid of it, I would. But until we had another way to find that extra revenue, I think it would be impossible to change it at the moment. With regards to personal qualities, obviously it's a tricky question. I think I have got pretty good people skills. I get on with people. I can talk to people on all levels. I'm not worried about their background, where they come from. I'm just quite easygoing, I'm quite down to earth, yet I seem to be able to take an intelligent view to looking into research and finding out information and really working very hard to achieve what needs to be achieved. Thank you.
Hugh Raymond.
It's a shame it's a singular question, because the biggest problem with GST is that you've got to look at the whole tax system. And if you look at GST, it becomes a piecemeal situation. I mean, we've had questions all across the board, whether you've got company tax, stamp duty, corporation tax, and inheritance tax. We've got to look at this whole picture, and I don't think we've looked at it. We've looked at it over the years, and we've gone with GST. You see, I'm a great believer that I think there are some exemptions, and I think we should look at some exemptions, and especially with food and clothing with the younger people and with people that don't have the higher income levels. But to be able to do it in a piece, we tend to do, what I find in the island, and with all the work I do with some of the departments I deal with, is that we do it in piecemeal situation instead of looking at the overall picture, and I think that we really do have to go back and look at the overall picture. With regards to personnel qualities, well, the personal qualities, without being, I suppose, you end up trying to be not conceited, but with the roles that I play within the island, I'm assuming they've allowed me in there because I'm quiet? No, I'm not. So therefore, I think that you have to look at, I mean, the one thing that I learned very quickly was taking over from somebody like Mitch, who was the epitome of what the Honorary Police was all about. And to follow somebody like that, you suddenly find yourself in how much he was respected within all the departments. And that has been a difficult situation, but we have succeeded, and the Honorary Police does have to change. I mean, there's a huge thing, it does have to change, but those personal skills that I've got from that, the personal skills of dealing with the Sports Council and trying to get money out of EDD, and trying to get the sports going is another asset that I've managed to pick up. The big thing about that is that being able to sit down, negotiate, talk, and try to get something out at the end of the day, and that's what I'd hope to bring to the state if I was elected. Thank you.
Sarah Ferguson.
Right, well, GST was part of a three-pronged programme to deal with the pressure we were getting from the OECD and the EU, and there was meant to be growth, savings, and GST to fill the gap. Unfortunately, we all know what happened to growth and savings. I don't think we should do anything with GST until we've had the tax review that we started screaming for in 2014. As Guy has already, that must include a cost benefit of 0.10, because I think 0.10's day is over and we need to move on. As Guy said, we have an allowance, which is actually the Le Fondre Amendment, which makes an allowance on GST to people who don't pay tax but have a low income. And naturally, the very low paid are taken care of with income support. It's a nice, simple system at the moment, which means we have fewer civil servants and it's easier to run and it's cheaper. The UK GST exemption book is 97 pages long. If you want that in 10-point type too. Personal qualities, well, recently I was quoted in the JEP as not being a shrinking violet, which, not very violet anyway, pink perhaps. My real thing is that I ask questions. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So, and it's all based actually on a fairly varied experience, whether it's engineering, finance, compliance, banking supervision, it's all there.
Nicola Cornu.
GST is a profoundly regressive consumption tax. It weighs heavily upon wage and salary earners. It's designed that way Because remember what I said about austerity. It's a policy designed to protect the incomes of the rich. And it's a hallmark policy of the Council of Ministers, to protect the rich and to oppress the poor. And the poor know it because they fear GST rising. And the reason it hasn't risen is because the Council of Ministers know it would be far too obvious that what they are up to. The rich, of course, make their wealth through capital gains. Personal qualities. Well, I'll take you back to virtue. What sort of virtue have you got in these politicians here? That concept I was talking about from the French Revolution of the Enlightenment. Is there virtue here? These politicians who are going to be truthful and honest? I think I'm stoic. You have to be in Jersey if you believe and want to fight for democracy, for reform, for modernization, because it's a long process. It's part of the longue durée. It's going to take a very long time, and I'm prepared to be in the books and annals of history, along with Abraham Jones Lacroix in the 19th century, fighting for progress. Another quality, courageous. You've got to be, because the system will fight you and break you. The JEP sought to break me in 2014. They didn't. I'm back because I believe. It's like faith when you're a Christian. If you believe it, you march on and on because you believe and because it's right. That is what is my virtue. I believe.
John Young.
I think looking back, none of us, I don't think, would have chosen to introduce GSC at the time. But I think now we have to accept that our economy is absolutely, it's on our economy, our public sector and our public services are absolutely dependent upon it. Now, I don't think we can even contemplate increasing that tax because that would send the economy of the island into a downward spiral and it would cause even worse difficulties for the low paid and increase the level of inequality in Jersey. So I would always favoured exemptions, particularly on food for lower paid people, because I cannot think it's right to tax that. And I'm not happy that the system we've got for Social Security compensation for that reaches anywhere near the right number of people. So yes to exemptions, and I don't accept we have to have 97 pages in a manual to be able to make simple exemptions for things like food for people that really matter. We have to have this tax review because one could talk all night about the injustices and inequities of our tax system that started out very simple, has become more and more convoluted, where 20 means 20, some people get allowances, some people don't, marginal rate reliefs and all this kind of stuff that nobody understands, and some people on current year, some old, so it all has to be sorted out, and of course, corporate tax. Well, what a system actually penalises or he makes it disadvantages locally owned businesses and encourages those businesses to be sold, and tax avoidance because it leads to capitalisation of earnings. Personal qualities, well, promoting self, I don't find it easy, to be honest, but one has to be self-aware. I've got a thick skin, I'm tenacious, people say I don't give up, and I'm selfish, but I got faults, I talk too much.
Mike Dunn.
Yes, we tend to forget, living in this little island, that we're the Protocol 3 arrangement with the European Union. In fact, is Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, and we're now going to be joined in discussions with a lot of British overseas territories who've all got problems arising from Brexit. So you must bear in mind also that the Isle of Man has had a VAT arrangement with the United Kingdom. I don't know if it's finally gone now, but they were scrapping it. Now, these things are all back on the agenda again, because bear in mind when the Protocol 3 was first dreamed up back in the 1970s, there were 9 countries in the European Union. There are now 27 plus the United Kingdom, whether it's in or out. So all those countries have got to agree to whatever arrangements are made for us and the British overseas territories and the Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man. none of these islands are the same. We've all got different circumstances. So those decisions were made in the 1970s for us 3 little islands, and we didn't really participate in the discussion to any great extent. Now, of course, we will all have our own views about particular things that should be protected, should happen, and it'll be incredibly complicated. And I feel extremely sorry for the British government, which is going to have to do the negotiating because we can't do it ourselves. Now, VAT, GST, inevitably, I mean, I don't know what the current rate in the UK is, it's 25% on some things, 20%. It was nice, handy 10% at one stage, then it went 12.5%, nobody could work it out. This is how it goes on, but it goes up. It doesn't come down. And the Jersey GST will inevitably go up. And of course, we're tied because we are stuck into this finance centre activity. And if, for some reason, the finance centre income does diminish to any great extent, and it's very likely it will, obviously, GST will be the first thing, it's the easiest thing to raise. And I think, unfortunately, because I'm a bit of a pessimist on these things, that Brexit will cause a diminution of international tax revenue, and other taxes, whether it's GST, other taxes, will be collected on the captive audience. If we design your car, that's it.
Christian May.
One of the most interesting questions to come out of the hustings during the last St. Owen's hustings was, what do the states spend on a daily basis? And looking at the most recent figures, because that question intrigued me, it's £2,082,265 a day. Now, with GST covering approximately 15% of our total outgoings, I think it's quite clear that we are stuck for the moment with GST. I think that it would be ideal if we could have exemptions, but there are practical difficulties with those at the cash register. What we do need to see is a comprehensive tax review. We need to look at 010, and we need to look at the way that the island is bringing in taxation from corporate business. Just today, the Fiscal Policy Panel released their latest report showing that Jersey's growth in real terms has actually reduced to now only 0.5%. And they actually advised that the government should not be putting in new charges and new taxation above those that they've proposed. So I don't want to see an increase in taxation. I don't want to see a health charge. I don't want to see a solid waste charge, which, if you look at the text of the MTFP, is clearly designed to be passed on to you from the businesses. When it comes to personal qualities, obviously one that everyone up here has mentioned, which is humility. That's why we're standing here. But when it comes down to it, I think one of the things I cannot offer is independence. I will stand up to things when I don't think they're right. Many people accuse me of saying, well, your establishment, you're right-wing. I'm not. I'm a centrist. I stood up to the Council of Ministers on People's Park because I believed it was the right thing to protect People's Park. I've stood up for equal marriage because I think that was the right thing for the LGBT people in the island. Other than that, I have a solid business background. I'm trained as a barrister. I can speak publicly. I can negotiate and I can debate, and I hope I would bring those skills as well. Thank you.
Okay, can we have another 2 questions from the floor, please?
My name is Robert Ward. Can I ask the panel what they think Jersey's minimum wage should be and how would they live on it?
Another question, please. Another question, please. Somebody a bit different. Oh, Mrs. Degaluni hasn't asked the question.
I'm fairly strongly of the view that Jersey has one of the biggest concentrations of property value probably in the world. Do we do enough to ensure that our very rich people living in Jersey contribute adequately to the island? England is thinking of bringing in property taxes, I believe, on over 2 million. Should we not be looking at what the super wealthy are bringing in and how they could bring in more?
Could you just give your name as well, please?
So, Jeanette Dagtoglu.
Thank you. Okay, we start with Stevie Ocean, please.
Right, well, on the point of the minimum wage, I'm also a consultancy, as well as the Chief Minister's Office, and have been for many years. I'm also a consultancy on the Employment Forum. So this is a subject that comes up quite often. It's been argued by certain people in the States about what it should be, what it shouldn't be. This is a very, very difficult one to actually answer because I actually voted for it to be increased just like Jeff Southern did, but it was refused. So where do we stand? Maybe £10 would be a good idea. But there again, it's going to be debated. A lot of people are going to turn around and say, well, yeah, okay, fair enough. Other people are going to turn around and say, it's not enough. So where does it stop and where does it start? You see, that's the problem you've got here because, unfortunately, even if you put a basic parameter down to say £10, people are going to turn around and say, it's not enough, we want more. And so on that point, I can't really give you any more detail than that at the moment, okay? Now, yeah, the lady mentioned about the property and the situation with 1-1Ks in the island. Yeah, I've got a great idea. And it concerns another way of actually getting these people to actually contribute to the island. There's a lot of problems with students that don't qualify for student loans. And maybe the 1-1Ks could crowdfund their education. Now, that's another way of them contributing to the island. It's something to look at. I'm not saying it's going to be written in stone, but it's something that we could look at. Thank you very much.
Guy DeFay.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't simply want to see a minimum wage. I like the idea of a statutory living wage, which I hope would be calculated on a basis, to answer the second part of your question, that I would be able to live on it. And that calculation poses a certain difficulty, but clearly the people who are most up against it at the moment are those living in private rental accommodation, as opposed to people who are paying off their mortgages or living in states housing. And why would I favour that? It's partly because we need to inject money into our own economy. We can't do quantitative easing in Jersey. We don't have a central bank. We can't do helicopter money. But if you go around our town, you will see that people are not shopping. Retail is failing. And that's because people simply don't have the spare money to spend. So a statutory living wage would actually inject money into the right sector of our economy. Because let's face it, we've lived through wage freezes and so on. Do you think that a wage freeze affects you if you're earning 80,000 a year or 100,000 a year? Barely notice. It does affect you if at the bottom end of the earning spectrum. So, yes, I would favour a minimum wage, purely actually on economic terms, not on some sort of point of socialist principle. It's an economic move to kickstart and pump prime our local economy, which badly needs it right now. Now, very interested in the question about property, but I've got to say some people who may own properties are not cash rich. We have to be very careful how we deal with this. I have a plan, very simple. We change the emphasis in property conveyancing in the Royal Court. The seller pays, they've just had the big check, they can pay the stamp duty. It's a cunning take on capital gains tax, and if you analyse it, you'll see how it'll work.
Mary O'Keefe-Berger.
Yes, thank you. I'll just touch on the 1-1Ks, officially 1-1Es, but for some reason we'll always call them 1-1Ks. For those of you who don't know, they pay a minimum of £125,000 a year tax, and then they pay 1% of their income over and above that, which is what their contribution is to the island. Recently, however, there's also being a move for more philanthropic elements to their application and coming into the island, and I certainly welcome that. And I would welcome it that we could make sure that some of this money would be channeled in a more charitable way and really helping some people out. With this £125,000 minimum that they pay every year, I do think we might look at that figure. If I was elected, I would be asking to look at that figure. For people who are looking at coming in from next year onwards, we can't make it non-competitive. We have to be more competitive than other jurisdictions to make it attractive for high net worth individuals to come to Jersey. So if we price them out of the market, they're not going to come, and they are valuable to our community. So I would be looking at raising that initial figure of 125 up further and keeping everything else still the same. On the question of the minimum wage, I mean, for me that ties in with, you know, lots of things. I think it should be a living wage. It should be a little bit more affordable. People should be able to have heat. They should be able to have food, and they should be able to have clothing as a bare minimum, and obviously a roof over their head. And if the finance doesn't cover this, we're doing something very wrong.
Thank you, Raymond.
Yeah, the reverse way around, madam. Dealing with a lot of the trouble is the 11Ks do provide other situations in the island. The point is, in most cases, they don't really want to know, they don't want people to know what's happening. And I very much take the view that Mary's taking, and that is that they are helping charities, and they are helping quite a few sporting bodies within the island. And the structure that has just been passed at St. Peter's, which the planning department agreed, has been virtually underwritten by certain 11Ks that have come into the island. There is a lot of things going on. If you start taxing them on capital gains, if they sell their property and move on, then you get into the situation that where do you draw the line? But I would sort of almost go down the route of saying, well, 125,000 at the moment, it is going up. They should be paying a little bit more. They can afford to do it. But I am conscious that there is a lot of money going into the economy, not directly into the state's economy, but it's going into the economy that is affecting a lot of our charities and a lot of our people. And I wouldn't want to see that disbanded because of putting the rates up too high on other things. With regards to minimum wage, I sat on a committee in the UK. The biggest problem with minimum wage is what has just been said. You've got mortgage, you've got rent, you've got food. People, where do you balance the books? Who comes up with the situation of deciding what is the average rent? What is the average cost of living? Again, it's a question of sitting down and saying, right, that is what's going to happen, that's what it's going to cost, and then you determine what the minimum wage is. Living on it does become difficult, which I totally respect. Thank you.
Sarah Ferguson.
Thank you. I wouldn't do anything with property until I've had the tax review, because, you know, for a start, Hugh mentioned capital taxes. Well, capital taxes are political taxes, and I'm very much against them. But any tax review should include a cost-benefit analysis of every section of our tax system, including 11Ks. I mean, some of them, yes, are very good and are putting money into the economy. Some have houses that they occupy for 2 months in the year. And under 010, we have a wonderful built-in tax avoidance scheme, and even my colleagues from the finance industry say, enough is enough, we need to deal with it. What should the minimum wage be? Well, I asked a local businessman about it last week, and he just fell about laughing, because the only member of staff he's got working on minimum wage is somebody, an apprentice, who'd started the day before. None of the rest of his staff, he doesn't, and his friends who've got other businesses, he said he doesn't know anybody who's working on minimum wage. I assume they're mainly in the agricultural industry, but I'm not sure on that. I need to obviously check. But the problem with minimum wage, if it's too high, jobs go and unemployment rises. And that's the balancing act that we have got to face. The group that looks at minimum wage, I think, do their best on this, because, as I say, it's a balancing act.
Nicola Cornue.
An interesting juxtaposition of questions. The poor and the super rich, who coexist in the same island, yet live in different worlds. The minimum wage, of course, is quite low, and where should there be a living wage? Well, it has been suggested £9.40, but I would suggest it should be at least £10. Some do already receive that. But there are large sections of the working class, you don't see them, they do live in St Helier, who are on extremely low wages, paying very high rents to rentiers, and their life is difficult, particularly the immigrant community. Many of them graduates, but forced by the 5 years rule to take up jobs in hospitality. The next question was about the super rich. Of course, we know this concept from Occupy about the 1% and the 99%. The whole of the island is set up. Its finance centre is all about light taxes on capital. It's about preserving the income of the rich. Now, if you, as kind of sections of the middle class, suddenly find your taxes are coming down on you, well, that's because you've got a government that represents not you, but the 1%, the 10% which is being paid by finance industry and their clients who've got companies paying nothing. Nothing. And that's what's causing our structural deficits. And where's the government that represents us? We don't have it. We have a government that actually represents the 1%, the super rich. Why are they doing everything in their favour? Working people know that, and that's why they don't vote, because they know that this government does not represent them, that politicians lie.
John Young.
Like other speakers, I don't feel comfortable about our existing policies in either of these areas. Life is pretty tough, I'm sure, for those on minimum wage. With our shortage of rentals and pressure on housing, the costs of going to the doctors, with the expenses of young children and food and GSTs, it's pretty awful, I think. And I'm not satisfied that our systems recognise that enough. And so I'm very much with this move towards a living wage, which was, I believe, in London. It's been adopted by many employers to try and move it towards paying people a decent wage, and many businesses have come on board with that. And indeed, I think the last George Osborne's budget adopted that. It may have not been an ideal rate in the UK, but I think that was a move in the right direction, which Jersey should follow. What should the absolute wage be? I'm afraid I don't know, but it's got to be more than as it is now. The super rich. We're in this situation where first-time buyers struggle to buy their first homes, and they pay tax. They pay a tax stamp duty on properties at the market between 400,000 and 450,000. I brought an amendment to try and get it down, and I partly succeeded. But still, we have a situation where right at the top of the market, the very expensive properties are sold. And I've never had concerns until recently about the 11K policy. I thought this was reasonably in balance. But now I've got major concerns because we are promoting this worldwide to try and attract the super rich here. And that is leaving us all these problems where people bring these corporate structures without the tax commitment. The figures are too low, the 125k and the 1%. Yes, there are some that are altruistic, but I don't believe they necessarily all are. And it changes the face of the island with those redeveloped properties hugely forever. So I got concerns. I want to see some policy adjustments.
Mike Dunn.
Yes, Sarah keeps quoting. She says, profits made in Jersey should be taxed in Jersey. But that's not a principle that she applies to the rest of the world. And that's part of our problem, because we are a place for people to put their profits from all over the world if they want to secrete them or evade certain, or void is the word we have to use, isn't it? Now, this is the business we're in. And this is one of the unfortunate things. It creates a very false, as is being said all around here, as an agreement. There are people who are absurdly rich, and there are people who are very poor. I'm a pensioner. I live on a pension. Now, there are loads of people who are in that situation, but there's a lot of people coming up through the community who can't earn enough wage to save any money. They'll never, ever get out of the poverty trap. They can't afford to buy a house. They'll always be in social housing if they stay here or if they don't go somewhere else. There's always going to be this category of people, and it's going to be an increasing category of people, because if the population grows or whether the population doesn't grow, these people are captive here. They can't be going. There's not easy to go anywhere else. Lots of people here, they've had families here, they're stuck here, and a £10 wage, a £10 per hour wage is not sufficient to do all the things that society requires you to do. You can't feed yourself, house yourself, provide your pension. You cannot do it on that wage. Now, obviously, if you made it £10 an hour, the agricultural industry would be screaming. They say, we can't possibly afford to pay it. This is a great dichotomy. This is a great problem for it. This is one of the dilemmas. How can you have these poor activities alongside super rich finance activities? And I'm afraid Brexit will be looking at all these things, not because they want to look at all these things, but these unfairnesses will become apparent. And they will have to look at unfair tax systems. And the £11 billion fine, which has been levied today in Ireland against a particular company, is just the tip of the iceberg of the sort of thing that happens. We see it every day. Banks paying billions of pounds fines because they're playing this silly game, evading their responsibilities, moving the money around, and the poor people don't get their fair share.
Christian May.
Your question was, what do we think it should be and how we live on it? I certainly agree with most of the rest of the panel. We should have a minimum wage that is a living wage. I think that should be between £9.70 and £10 an hour. And how would I live on it? With difficulty. There are a lot of people, both working and in Middle Jersey, who are renting property, who have sleepless nights because they're facing taxation and bills, and they're worrying about how they're going to pay for their children to eat, and they're worrying about how they're going to afford their next meal, never mind saving to actually be able to buy property or to go on holiday or to be able to live with some luxury. Everyone should be able to live with dignity and live with comfort, and I think that is something that we definitely need to achieve, and we're not doing that at the moment. When it comes to property tax, my prime concern is that if we put in place a property tax for 111Ks or the super rich, and it's effective, then states members in future may go, well, that's effective with that bracket, but let's just move down the value of the property, and we'll start to see taxation applied to people within this room. We do need to look at what 111Ks are contributing to the island. It's been many years since the 125,001% value was looked at. Many of them do contribute, as Hugh and other people have said, in a philanthropic way. They contribute towards heritage, they contribute towards sport. I'd like to see a lot of that money ring-fenced for education. We are facing a problem where we have students within the island who simply can't afford to go to university because there's no adequate student loan scheme. It's one of the core aspects of my manifesto, and if we can apply some of the money from 111Ks towards that, then I think that would be one of the most productive uses for it.
MEZEC.
Rob, I'm a founding member of the Jersey Living Wage campaign, and I'm a member of their advisory board, and the studies we've done have shown that living wage in Jersey is going to be over £10 an hour. And I think that actually it's a disgrace that the current Council of Ministers have, for the first time in its history, let Jersey's minimum wage, which is now £6.97, fall behind the minimum wage of the UK, where the cost of living is much lower. That's now £7.20. I think that's a disgrace. And if you look at what's happening politically in the UK, all of the political parties, Labour, Tory, Liberal, all of them, are climbing over each other, trying to outdo each other on promises on the minimum wage, because they recognise that what Sarah said about raising minimum wage causing unemployment is actually not true. All of the studies show that any jobs that are lost as a result of a rising minimum wage are offset by the jobs that are created because of the economic stimulus that it provides. So I support raising the minimum wage significantly. I won a proposition in the States to get the government to investigate the impact on the tax and benefit system that a significant rise would do. And I also beat the government when they tried to introduce a lower minimum wage for people under the age of 25. I will bring propositions every year to raise the minimum wage until we win this battle, because I think it's right, both morally and economically. Do we do enough to ensure the wealthiest pay their fair share in Jersey? Well, no, actually we do quite the opposite. The Council of Ministers does whatever it can to shelter them from tax rises. This new proposed health tax, the 1% will be on income up until £160,000 a year, then you won't pay it. It's the same with the long-term care charge. And I think that's regressive, it's morally wrong, and it's bad for our public finances. And because we're in St. One, I'll give you another exclusive. Tomorrow, I'll be lodging a proposition in the States to get in the next budget to remove these caps so that we do ask them to pay their fair share, because it's wrong that we're asking low and middle earners to pay and not asking them to pay. It's absolutely wrong, and I'll be fighting against it.
Okay, thank you. As I indicated at the start of the evening that I was going to call this hustings to a close at 9:30. It is now 9:30, so the timing has been perfect for this evening. Can I thank you all for your attendance this evening, and I hope you've all found this informative. Please feel free to stay on and speak to the candidates afterwards, but can you please all give yourselves a round of applause, and I thank you all for your attendance.